I wanted to talk to a legal expert about this regarding contracts, personal service contracts, moral turpitude clauses, and whether or not Dan Webb is going to take a lot of money out of Northwestern on behalf of his client, Pat Fitzgerald. So let's welcome Andrew Stoltman, a leading Chicago attorney and a Northwestern law professor, back to WS. Thank you, Andrew, for your time. We appreciate it.
Anytime.
Okay, I'll be delicate because obviously you're at Northwestern, but we don't know what's in Pat Fitzgerald's contract. Okay, but in general, do you think the firing after an agreed suspension, publicized, could that possibly be a violation of Fitzgerald's employment contract?
Well, I think that's a good question, but I think it's kind of a two-part answer. First off, the initial firing was likely justified because the entire moral turpitude and the entire for-cause standard is pretty broad. And even though it's pretty clear that Fitzgerald didn't know about the hazing, Northwestern took special emphasis to say he should have known about it. Now, what I find really interesting is the second part of the equation, meaning they reached a settlement for that 2-week suspension. And the fact that Northwestern then reneged on it, that might be the best claim that he has, at least in a court of law, or in this case, likely arbitration, since most of these go to arbitration.
Okay, I want to get to that, but first, just to double down on kind of the first statement here. So can allegations alone, without any proof, rise to the level of fired with cause? And he's not an at-will employee, so is it different for somebody with a personal service contract as opposed to an at-will employee?
Yes, and the standard is likely laid out in the contract, which we, of course, haven't seen. But yes, I mean, mere allegations can be sufficient, assuming those allegations can be substantiated. If someone came forward and said he was sexually harassing me, and there was no backup to that, then that might be an issue. But it sounded like there were multiple people who said, yes, this hazing took place. Yes, it was problematic. So I think that's probably enough.
Who decides exactly the portal, how wide the portal is for firing if you use the moral turpitude clause?
Boy, that's that's really hard because that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And there's some things that are very clearly violative of that, right? Certain actions, certain conduct of coaches over the years. Now, look, this hazing situation, it's not exactly new in college football, right? Many coaches have actually been fired for this over the last 5 years or so. So it'll be interesting to see whether that is enough for a for-cause firing. I think it's going to be, but, it's certainly not clear.
If nothing new came to light in the short span of time between the suspension and the termination, wasn't the original, and you kind of touched on this, wasn't the original suspension considered a resolution between the parties? Done, turn the page, close the book?
Yes, and I think Dan Webb has really kind of centered in on that, and that might be his best argument, and I expect that to be the tip of the spear in the lawsuit against Northwestern.
This full investigation, which was conducted by the former Illinois Inspector General Maggie Hickey, that's not been made public. I don't know if it's going to be, but right now, can Webb, Fitzgerald, make a claim that they have a legal right to see it, to know what's in it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if Northwestern tries to play games with that in the course of discovery, it absolutely will be part of the record, and Webb and Fitzgerald will be able to get their hands on it because that's obviously a really, really important piece of evidence in the entire case.
If Hickey said, and the president also corroborated this, that they found no credible evidence that Fitzgerald knew about the hazing, will that quote eventually help pay Dan Webb's inevitably large fee?
At first blush, you say yes, and it certainly would seem like it. But, in the same sense, he probably has a duty to know. Now, look, I didn't play college football, but everybody that I've spoken to have told me over the years that these college football coaches know everything that's going on in their program. And if not the head coach, some of the assistant coaches. So I think kind of the $64,000 question is, should he have known if he didn't know? And I think ultimately a judge or an arbitrator will make that decision.
Now, we don't know a lot of the details in these hazing incidents. But Rick Morrissey, a fine columnist for the Sun-Times, went out of his way earlier this week to say this can't be compared to Penn State. Okay, so let's just say that for the record. However, does the hiring of Webb lead to any speculation in your mind that Fitzgerald could be trying to hedge against lawsuits, civil, or even a criminal liability? In other words, how legally exposed in the future would Coach Fitzgerald be?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, Dan Webb's one of the finest attorneys here in this, state, if not the country. I think it's really smart for him to have hired somebody like that. I don't think there's even a shred of doubt that there won't be any criminal liability, but hiring someone like Dan Webb really sends kind of a clean message to Northwestern that we are in this to win this. You owe me $42 million of the remaining amount of money left on my 10-year contract, and ante up now, and you can pay peacefully, or I can take it from you in a year. So I think it's a great move by Coach Fitz.
So 42, I know I would settle. I would probably settle for, I'd cut a deal right now.
That's a drop in the bucket for you, John. Come on.
I would say, how about $21 million, and we'll just turn the page, close the book, whatever. You know,
I think both sides have a vested interest in getting this thing settled, right? Northwestern is an amazing university. They value their reputation. Coach Fitz likely is going to want to work again. This has just a textbook example of a case that should settle, and hopefully it does.
Yeah, I agree. Really appreciate your analysis. Great having you on. Andrew Stoltman, thank you, sir. Leading Chicago attorney, Northwestern law professor, and our go-to guy for all things legal. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.